the mainstream gym advice is what everybody in the gym is following. Okay, so are most people that go to the gym big? Are most people that go to the gym strong? Are most people that go to the gym ripped? The answer is no to all of those questions. So since the most people are following the mainstream advice about how to get big, how to get strong, how to get ripped, and most people at the gym do not have those results. And then the same thing with that, most people that are on steroids and going to the gym don't have those results. That shows that the mainstream advice that everyone's hearing, that everyone's repeating, that you hear everybody parroting, everybody says it everywhere you go, and it's like, oh, well, this must be the way it is because this is what so many different people are saying. Well, the results are right in front of you, every of those mainstream things, those things that are the acceptable things to say. Every time you go to the gym, the physiques you see there, the performances you see there are illustrative of the results of that mainstream advice. The mainstream advice about how to take steroids, the mainstream advice about how to eat your diet, the mainstream advice about how to train. It's right there in front of your face every time you go to the gym. And then does it look to you like most people that go to the gym are just like fucking ripped and fucking strong as hell and fucking muscular as fuck? I mean, no. So this information has completely failed the lifting world. It is completely wrong. That's a very probably shocking statement for most of you, because probably most of you think, well, I'm just not doing it hard enough. I'm just not doing it hard enough. But no, that's not it. It's that the advice, the information that is the mainstream about bodybuilding is wrong. It's all wrong. It's all bad. It's all false. It's all leading you astray. You're trusting people. And humans have a weakness in their cognition or their mental abilities. It's part of human psychology that if they see other humans say things over and over again, and it's said from many different sources, even if the information is not true, the human takes it as a truth because of the repetition. And this has been studied in psychology, so it's actually, this is a weakness of the human psyche. And this is what's happening here. This is why you keep on doing this advice that's given to you about how to do things with bodybuilding, and it just keeps on not working. But you be like, well, that's what everybody's saying. And everywhere I go, it's the same thing said. So it must be true, even though it doesn't work for me. And it doesn't work for basically anyone that I see in the gym. It might work for like less than 1 out of 100 people. but it must be true because everyone's saying it. So again, I just want to say that the mainstream advice about bodybuilding, about fitness, has completely failed the gym community. And it's not right. None of it is right. It's all wrong. And, you could say that, you can wonder, is it intentionally wrong or not? Well, I think a lot of people, because of that psychological weakness, they repeat things that they hear, and that is the mainstream advice, and they repeat it as true, and so it kind of grows on itself, and they're not intentionally deceiving you. But the origins of a lot of this advice was probably intentional deceit. So the one thing, insulin, the Lord of the Rings, what do I mean by this? Well, I mean that it's the master hormone. Every hormone that you use in bodybuilding is dependent or feeds into insulin. What does insulin do? Insulin is the storage hormone in the body. The pancreas creates it. When you eat food, your pancreas releases insulin in order to make the food from your blood go into the cells, okay? So, food that you eat, calories that you eat, either will or will not be absorbed as a response to the hormone insulin, okay? So what we can first do is we can look at type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is a genetic lack of the ability to produce insulin. And so before insulin was a pharmaceutical grade product, what did a diabetic person look like? Well, they looked like an anorexic person, and they would die at a young age because no matter how much they ate, no matter how many calories went into their system, that person could not gain weight. They could not hang on to the food. They could not hang on to the calories. So even though they were taking in thousands more calories than they were burning per day, that food was not being absorbed by the cells, and therefore they were anorexic, and they would continually lose weight until they died, while they were eating more calories than they burned every single day. They would continually lose weight until they died. And then pharmacological insulin was invented, and we were able to stop type 1 diabetes from being an immediate death sentence and give people insulin. And now the calories that they ate would actually stay in their body instead of just not absorbing. So type 1 diabetes breaks the law. The law. Oh, the law of thermodynamics that you hear so much about. Calories in, calories out. And there is nothing more to it. And if you say there is more to it, that's blasphemy. That's blasphemy. Do you deny God? Do you deny science? This is probably the most controversial statement I've ever made on the podcast, is that calories in, calories out is not what determines weight gain and weight loss. But it's not. You know, you've heard it said so many times that you probably think, well, it has to be true. But it's not the way it is. Insulin is what determines weight gain or weight loss. Here's another example. There have been studies, and you can look this up, on diabetics, again, which they're the great example to show what insulin does because they're insulin dependent. And so they would be put on 2,500 calories per day. And then they would be injected, different groups on the same amount of calories would be injected with different doses of insulin. And the weight gain that they would have from the same amount of calories was directly dependent on the dosage of insulin that they gained. With each, they're injected with each increment of insulin, more, the people eating the same amount of calories per day gained more weight depending on how much insulin they were taking. And not just like, oh, well, one guy's taking a lot, one guy's taking a little. It was so sensitive to how much insulin that they're taking that each increment of insulin that was taken caused more weight gain on the same amount of calories eaten. So again, we have what? They broke the law of thermodynamics. Do you deny science? Do you deny God? Okay. No, actually, this is science. And you can go look it up right now. You can go look it up right now for you guys that are obsessed with this stuff. If this is just too unbelievable to you. If this is just too unbelievable to you, you can go look it up because this shit's on Google. Okay, so if you feed people the same amount of calories, they will gain different amounts of weight depending on the dosage of insulin that you inject them with. If you have people with no insulin, you can feed them an infinite amount of calories and they will lose weight no matter what is fed to them and dwindle away and die if they have no insulin. Okay, so Insulin is what makes you gain weight or not gain weight. The amount of insulin that your body produces or does not produce. The sensitivity of your cells to insulin or the insensitivity of your cells to insulin. These are the factors that cause weight gain and weight loss. So there are certain factors that will make a person produce more or less insulin. Okay, of course we have it pharmacologically. And why do big bodybuilders take insulin? Well, they take insulin because it makes them bigger. And why does it make them bigger? Because it makes them gain weight on the same amount of calories that they're eating before that didn't make them gain weight. If you talk to bodybuilders that use insulin, and they're honest bodybuilders that will talk to you about PEDs, that's what they will tell you. That's the reason why they use insulin. It makes them be able to gain weight on the same amount of food, so they don't have to eat so much. Instead of eating 7,000 calories per day, every day, in order to gain weight, they only have to eat 5,000 calories every day to gain weight. And when they max out the calories and they couldn't get bigger anymore, maybe the total max they could ever eat was 7,000 calories per day. Well, now they add the insulin and now they can get bigger than they could if they didn't take insulin and were eating 7,000 calories per day, okay? So that's pharmacological insulin. But what about, so now let's talk about insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, okay? So if a person is very sensitive to insulin, then their body is not going to need to produce a lot of insulin to get an effect. So that means that their total body insulin levels are not going to be super high. So when this person eats, they're so sensitive to the insulin that small amounts of insulin being released from their pancreas is going to be enough to remove the energy from their bloodstream and get it into their cells. Whereas somebody that is insulin resistant, someone who is not sensitive to insulin, in order to remove the energy from their bloodstream and get it into the cells, their body, their pancreas, is going to have to release an enormous amount of insulin to overcome that insensitivity or that resistance to insulin. And remember how we talked about the dosage of insulin that is used in a diabetic or in a bodybuilder when it's used pharmacologically is what determines how much weight they gain on a certain amount of calories, okay? So if a insulin resistant person, an insulin insensitive person, is eating a certain amount of calories, well, they are going to have a lot more insulin in their blood, a lot higher dose, a lot higher amount of insulin in their blood to overcome that resistance, to get the energy out of their blood into the cells than someone who is insulin sensitive. Eating the same amount of calories their body is going to have to release less insulin in order to get that nutrition out of the bloodstream into the cells. So one person has more insulin in their blood than another person, and they're eating the same amount of calories. Well, since we know that insulin is what causes weight gain and weight loss, and the dosage does it in an incremental manner, who's going to be fatter? Who's going to be heavier? Who's going to have more weight? It's going to be the person who's insulin insensitive, because their body has to overcome that insensitivity, overcome that resistance in order to get the nutrition into the cells. So they have to produce a large amount of insulin, and insulin dosage is what causes weight gain. Okay, so that's, if you are having a really hard time losing fat and you've been really into this calorie model, man, really into this calorie model, and you believe it, you believe it's calories in, calories out, and that's all there is to it. Well, this is why, man, because you've got high insulin. Okay? And the insulin is what's determining whether you gain weight or whether you lose weight, irrespective of how many calories are coming into your system, okay? As is shown with diabetes, as is shown in scientific experiments with insulin being injected into people in varying doses. Okay? And I know that I'm going to have a bunch of people, saying, no, because you've heard this over and over again. And so that's what you believe, and you'll never believe anything else. But it's not true. And again, at the beginning of this podcast, I told you that I was going to tell you the truth. I've told you the truth about all things bodybuilding, okay? And that all this information that you've heard from the beginning of bodybuilding is wrong. And that everybody should, in the gym, following the best advice, the mainstream advice, they should all be ripped, they should all be strong, and they should all have big muscles because they've been following the mainstream advice. And if they're all, the average gym is the average example of the effects of the mainstream advice. Well, the mainstream advice is obviously bullshit. So that's why you guys come to this podcast and then you do what it says to do, and then you all make crazy gains. And, I get pictures sent from guys all the time, total freaks, learned everything from this shit. And, so just here to help. I wanted to read a few things, okay? Let's go to Wikipedia. I'm going to read lipolysis definition from Wikipedia, okay? Lipolysis is the chemical name of fat burning. So let's read the first thing that Wikipedia says. Lipolysis is the metabolic pathway through which lipid triglycerides, fat, are hydrolyzed into free fatty acids. It's used to mobilize stored energy during fasting or exercise. The most important regulatory hormone in lipolysis is insulin. Lipolysis can only occur when insulin action falls to low levels as occurs during fasting. So right there from Wikipedia, we hear that the most important hormone in fat burning is insulin, and that fat burning, lipolysis, can only occur when insulin action falls to low levels. So that means if you are a person who is low sensitivity to insulin, you're resistant to insulin, you're not sensitive to insulin, and your body is having to produce large amounts of insulin in order to get the food energy from your food out of your bloodstream into your cells. Well, lipolysis, fat burning in you, cannot occur because, as Wikipedia says, lipolysis can only occur when insulin action falls to low levels. And you don't have low levels, bro. You have what's called metabolic syndrome or hyperinsulinemia, which is where your insulin levels are always high. And so when you go into your calorie deficit, instead of your body grabbing that deficit of calories from the fat cells and then putting them out into the blood, your body can't do that. Those fat cells are locked. They're locked because you have chronically high insulin levels. Hyperinsulinemia. They're locked and the key has been fucking thrown away until you fix your insulin resistance. Okay? Your insulin insensitivity. Until that happens and you get your insulin levels low, your body will not be able to unlock those fat cells and start lipolysis because lipolysis can only occur when insulin action falls to low levels, as occurs during fasting. Okay, so instead, what's happening for you guys that, are saying, well, I'm doing a calorie deficit, but I'm not able to lose fat. Well, what's happening to you is that since your fat cells are locked, your body is reacting to that calorie deficit that you're making, that energy deficit that you're making by shutting down. Okay, because it can't fill that energy deficit through getting the energy from your fat cells. And it can't just die. So what does it do? Well, it starts lowering your body temperature. It starts making you want to sit down on the couch all the time. It starts making you not want to do activity. You stop moving. You stop doing basically everything. And you just become sedentary. And eventually, after enough pain doing that, and just, total suffering, you give up. Because that's the way it goes. If you're prolonged stress, you can't do it forever. Maybe you could do it for 2 months, Maybe you could do it for 3 months. Maybe you could do it for even 6 months, but can you do it for years? No. And that's why you're always going to have problems with weight loss, with weight rebound, etc. And why, the calories in, calories out model has completely failed you. And when you look at the gym, everybody's bodies in the gym, this is the mainstream advice, this model has also completely failed them. Okay, so that let's look at another Wikipedia article, okay? So this one is the definition of adipose tissue, fat tissue, okay? And let's go to, it says physiology of fat tissue. And it says, there is a constant flux of free fatty acids entering and leaving adipose tissue. The net direction of this flux is controlled by insulin. If insulin is elevated, then there is a net inward flux of free fatty acids, and only when insulin is low can free fatty acids leave adipose tissue. Insulin secretion is stimulated by high blood sugar, which results from consuming carbohydrates. Okay. So again, we're shown that insulin is what controls whether fat can leave the fat cells or not. That's what Wikipedia says. And what causes insulin release? Consuming carbohydrates. Now, consuming protein also causes insulin release, but carbohydrates are really the biggie. They're the big boy. And they're the ones that cause the most resistance or insensitivity. Because the more insulin is released in your blood, your body responds to insulin the way that it responds to recreational drugs. And so when you have a lot of insulin in your blood, your insulin receptors become desensitized. And what produces a lot of insulin? Well, carbohydrates. So if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, you're eating carbohydrates at every meal, you're constantly stimulating insulin. Well, as Wikipedia says, if insulin is elevated, then there is a net inward influx of free fatty acids, and only when insulin is low can free fatty acids leave fat tissue, okay? So if you're constantly eating, and then it says insulin secretion is stimulated by high blood sugar, which results from consuming carbohydrates. So if you're constantly consuming carbohydrates through the day, all your meals have carbohydrates, you're constantly producing insulin, and you're probably not sensitive to insulin because of that, if you're the average guy. And so you've got hyperinsulinemia. You've always got high insulin levels. And because you always have high insulin levels, you can never burn fat. Your fat cells are locked. And if you create an energy deficit, that energy will not be coming from your fat cells. That energy will be coming by your body shutting down in order to meet that fact that there is not as much energy coming in now. You cannot grab energy from fat cells. And so your body has to make do somehow in order to make do with the decreased amount of energy coming in. So it starts shutting itself down. Okay? It's not the carbohydrates and the insulin that you're consuming are locking your fat cells so that when you create these energy deficits, they're not, the deficit of energy is not being replaced by free fatty acids from fat cells. The deficit of energy is being compensated by your body shutting down and reducing its energy expenditure, which is why you've had such big problems following this advice for so long. And when you go to the gym and you look around, everyone else has had such big problems following this advice for so long, and it's failed everyone. Okay, so as is everything with bodybuilding, hormones are what control your results. You've been lied to as normal. You've been lied to about how to build muscle. You've been lied to that testosterone is not an important factor in being able to build muscle, that anabolic steroids are needed to build big muscles. You've been lied to that calories are what cause weight gain and weight loss, when it's hormones, as always, with everything in bodybuilding, with everything in body composition. It is hormones that controls your results. Weight gain and weight loss are controlled by the hormone insulin, and you've been lied to. Okay, so now, I'm thinking, should I leave it off on that? Should I leave it off on that for today? Okay, because that was a lot of information to take in. That was very complicated stuff, and it's going to be a big shock to a lot of you. That was a big shock of information. So let's leave it at that today. Okay?